colleges care about scores? Well, unless they don't. Even before COVID, there were several schools, many schools, a great many schools that were test optional. Fairtest.org, great website to go. They list, I think at this point, something like over 1,200 schools that are test optional. I would say this though, buyer beware a little bit, because about 1,000 of those schools you've never heard of in your life. When it comes down to like competitive schools, what we would say, just looking at admissions rates, competitive schools that are test optional, haven't been that many. Most of them whose names you'd know are kind of sitting here on this list. This test does not work out for your son or daughter. Great, it's a wonderful year for that to have happened, because most schools are going to be pretty flexible and extend some grace and some understanding about the whole situation. But if, on the other hand, you can put up some grade scores, that's going to help your application, right? I often tell parents that, right, colleges are AP optional and extracurricular optional, but we try really hard to assemble, right, the best application we have can on as many fronts as we can. So the PSAT is a lovely kind of low stakes way to get a gauge as to how your child would perform on the SAT should they have taken it then. Onward to the SAT and ACT. How are they scored? Most of you, I suspect, are probably SAT testers back in your day, because honestly, 20 years ago, it was really the case that the kids on the coasts generally, East Coast especially, took the SAT. West Coast was generally SAT, and anybody in the middle of the country took the ACT. Those rules have definitely changed, right? It is not that way anymore, and colleges will accept these scores interchangeably. So the ACT simply scored 1 through 36. It is a simple average of the 4 sections, English, math, reading, and science, each of which also scored from 1 to 36. SAT, on the other hand, out of the familiar 1600 scale that you remember from when you were a kid, there was a dalliance, if you will, with the 2400 scale. That only lasted a couple years, went away. Colleges really didn't know what to do with that extra 800, so the SAT scrapped it. So we're back to the 1600 you know and love. I will say though, that 800 reading is actually reading and writing. So it's both reading and grammar. So they got rid of the 800 for the grammar, but they didn't get rid of the grammar. And that's combined, of course, with the good old math, also out of 800. That gets us our total 1600. If you've had students who've taken a test already, you might have seen one of these kind of Byzantine score reports that the ACT or SAT provides with lots of subscores, right? English arts assessment score, cross-test scores in history and science. I advise you to do with all of those other scores what colleges will do with all of those other scores, which is basically ignore them.